I found my daughter's handwriting on a wall that no one was supposed to know existed. The words were small, scratched into the plaster with something sharp, and they said, "Dad, I tried to come home. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press them flat against the cold stone just to stay standing." I'd been searching for Lily for 14 months, and the whole time the answer had been 20 feet from where I slept. If you enjoy mysterious and dramatic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Francisko's stories. Her name was Lily Ann Hartwell. She was 23 years old when she disappeared, but in my mind, she will always be the girl who used to sit on the kitchen counter eating cereal straight from the box, swinging her feet and telling me about her plans. She had so many plans: architecture school, a trip to Portugal, a little apartment of her own with a window box full of herbs. She talked about that apartment the way other people talk about heaven, like it was a place she was absolutely certain she would reach someday. She never got there. It was a Tuesday in October, 14 months before the night I found that wall. She'd come home for the weekend to help her mother, Sandra, sort through some old furniture we were selling. Lily had always been good at that kind of thing, organizing, deciding what had value and what didn't. She stayed Saturday and Sunday, had dinner with us both Sunday evening, and then on Monday morning she kissed me on the cheek and said she'd call when she got back to the city. She never called. By Monday evening I was uneasy. By Tuesday morning I had driven the 2 hours to her apartment and found it locked, her car in the parking lot, her phone going straight to voicemail. I called the police. I filled out the forms. I sat in a gray plastic chair across from a detective named Marsh, who had kind eyes and a tired voice, and I told him everything I knew. In the weeks that followed, there were searches, appeals, a small candlelight vigil in the park near her apartment. Her photograph was on the local news twice. Friends were interviewed. Her boyfriend at the time, a quiet man named Derek who worked in insurance, was questioned and cleared. There were no suspects, no evidence of foul play, no body, just a young woman who had driven away from her parents' house on a Monday morning and then, as far as anyone could prove, ceased to exist. I didn't accept that. I never accepted that. But after 14 months, I had run out of places to look. The police had moved on in the way that police do when a case goes cold. Sandra had started seeing a therapist. I had stopped sleeping properly. I spent my evenings in Lily's old bedroom at the back of the house, sitting on her bed and reading through old messages she'd sent me, looking for things I might have missed. That was my life, until the night I noticed the crack in the basement wall. I'd gone down to the basement to find a box of old tax records. It was late, maybe 11 o'clock. The basement of our house had always been a cluttered place. Sandra's old pottery supplies on one side, boxes of seasonal decorations, an old chest freezer we barely used, a water heater in the corner. I had been down there 100 times over the years and never paid any real attention to the layout. But that night, for some reason, I stood still for a moment after I found the box I was looking for. I don't know what made me stop. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was some feeling I couldn't name. I stood there in the middle of the basement under the single hanging bulb, and I looked at the far wall. It was a plain wall, painted gray, the same as the rest of the basement. There were shelves along the right side, loaded with old paint cans and tools. But the wall itself, at the far end, had always seemed a little blank. I had never thought about it before. Now I thought about it. Our house was an old colonial, built in the 1940s. The basement ran almost the full width of the ground floor, but I had always assumed the far end was simply where the foundation met the hillside behind the house. The yard sloped upward from the back of the house. It was natural that the basement would be shorter than the house above it. I walked toward that far wall now, stepping over a box of Christmas lights. I pressed my hand against it. Solid. Cold. I moved along it slowly, and that's when I noticed the crack. It wasn't a structural crack, not the kind that zigzags down old plaster because the foundation is shifting. It was a straight crack, almost a perfect rectangle, maybe 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, running along the wall in a shape that made the hair on my arms rise before my brain had fully processed what I was seeing. A door that had been painted over again and again until it was almost invisible. I ran my fingers along the seam. There was a slight gap, maybe 2 millimeters, where the door didn't quite meet the frame. I could feel cold air coming through it, Not the normal cool of the basement, something colder, something with depth to it, the way air feels when it's coming from a space with real distance behind it. I looked for a handle. There wasn't one. I pushed. Nothing moved. I pressed harder, working my way along the surface, and then near the bottom right corner, my fingers found a small brass latch that had been painted over just like everything else. I scraped at it with my thumbnail. The paint crumbled away in dry flakes. I pressed the latch. The door swung inward with a low, grinding sound that seemed too loud in the silent basement. Beyond it was darkness. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then I went back upstairs, got the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and came back down. The room on the other side of that door was roughly 12 feet square. The floor was bare concrete. The walls were raw stone, the natural hillside behind the house, shored up with old timber beams. There was a single metal shelf unit against one wall, and on it were several items I recognized. Lily's green canvas backpack, the one she had taken with her the morning she left. I couldn't move. I stood in the doorway with the flashlight in my hand and the light fixed on that backpack, and I couldn't move. My throat had closed. My chest felt like something was sitting on it. After a moment, I made myself step inside. The backpack was zipped shut. I set the flashlight down on the shelf so it pointed upward and gave me some diffuse light, and I unzipped the bag with hands that were not quite steady. Inside, I found exactly what you would expect to find in a bag Lily had packed for a weekend at her parents' house: a change of clothes, her toiletry bag, a charger, a paperback novel with a bookmark in it, about 2/3 through, her journal, a small blue notebook she had kept since college, and her phone. Her phone was there, switched off, battery dead. I held it in both hands and stared at it. The police had never found her phone. We had all assumed she had it with her when she disappeared. I put everything back in the bag and stood up and looked around the room more carefully. That's when I found the writing on the wall. It was in the far corner, low down, near the floor. Small letters, scratched with something sharp, a key maybe, or a pin. I crouched down and brought the flashlight close, and I read it. Dad, I tried to come home. Below that, in smaller letters, I don't understand what's happening. Please find this. And below that, a date. November 3rd. She had disappeared on October 14th. She had been alive for at least 3 more weeks after she vanished. I sat down on the cold concrete floor of that hidden room, and I stayed there for a very long time. When I finally came back upstairs, Sandra was in the kitchen. She was in her robe making tea. She looked up when she heard me on the stairs and said, "I heard a noise. What were you doing down there?" "Looking for the tax records," I said. My voice came out flat and strange. She looked at me for a moment. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm going to bed." I didn't go to bed. I went to my study and I sat in my chair in the dark, and I thought about what I had found, and I thought about what it meant. Lily had been in our basement, in a hidden room in our own basement, after she disappeared. She had been alive, and she had been here, and she had written a message for me. How had her backpack gotten there? How had she gotten there? And most importantly, how had she gotten out? Because she wasn't there now. The room was empty except for her belongings, so either she had left on her own or someone had moved her. There was a third possibility that I didn't want to think about yet. I forced myself to think about the logistics, the hidden door in the basement wall. I had lived in this house for 19 years, and I had never known it was there. Someone had known. Someone had accessed that room, either with Lily or after she was taken there, and had painted over the door so carefully that it was nearly invisible. Who would do that? Who would know about a hidden room in my basement? I thought about the history of the house. We had bought it in 2005 from an elderly man named Forsyth who had lived there since the 1970s. The room could have predated us. It could have been there for decades, but Lily's backpack hadn't been there for decades. Her journal had a date on the first page. She had started it 2 years ago. Someone had put those things in that room within the last 14 months. I thought about who had keys to our house. Sandra, obviously. Me. We had given a spare key to Sandra's sister, Carol, who lived nearby, and we had given a key to our neighbor, Ray, years ago in case of emergencies. Ray. His name came to me, and I sat with it for a moment, turning it over. Ray Colton. He'd lived next door for 11 years. He was a quiet man, a retired engineer in his mid-60s who kept a meticulous garden and waved to us over the fence and sometimes came over for a beer on summer evenings. He had known Lily since she was a teenager. He had always been kind to her, attentive in the way that older neighbors sometimes are with young people they've watched grow up. I thought about the way he had reacted when Lily disappeared, how he had come over the evening we reported her missing and sat with us in the living room and shaken his head slowly and said, "I just can't believe it. I just cannot believe it." How he had brought us food for the first 2 weeks, casseroles and soups left on the doorstep. How after the first month he had quietly stopped mentioning her, the way you do when you believe someone is gone. I thought about how his house abutted ours, how his property extended along the back of our yard, right up to the slope of the hill, right up to the slope of the hill that backed against our basement wall. I sat up straight. If our basement extended into the hillside, and that hidden room made it clear that it did, further than I had ever realized, then what was on the other side of that hill? Ray's property. I needed to know if there was another entrance to that room, an entrance from outside, an entrance from Ray's side. I couldn't do it that night. It was nearly 1 a.m, and I was not thinking clearly enough to confront anything or anyone. I went to bed and lay awake for 3 hours and then fell into a shallow, restless sleep full of dreams I couldn't remember. In the morning, I waited until Sandra left for her therapy appointment, and then I went outside and walked along the back of our property, studying the hillside. The hill was steep, covered in ivy and old rhododendron bushes. I had never paid much attention to it. Now, I pushed through the rhododendrons, moving along the slope, looking at the ground and the hillside itself. The ivy was thick. In several places it had grown over what looked like old stonework, the original foundation of the hill retaining wall. I almost missed it. Midway along the slope, hidden under a curtain of ivy so thick it looked like a solid green wall, was a low wooden door. Old, dark with age and moisture, set almost horizontally into the hillside at an angle, like a cellar door. The ivy had grown over it so completely that you could press your hand against it and feel the wood but never know it was a door unless you were looking for it. I lifted the ivy. There were hinges on one side, rusted but there. I pulled. It was heavy, the wood swollen with years of moisture, but it opened. Below it, stone steps led down into darkness. My heart was hammering. I hadn't brought the flashlight. I went back inside, got it, and came back. I went down the steps. At the bottom was a narrow stone passage, low-ceilinged, running in the direction of my basement. About 20 feet along, it ended at a door, the same hidden door I had found from the other side the night before, now seen from the rear. There was a simple iron bolt on this side, which was currently unlatched. I stood in that passage and I understood. Someone could come in through the hillside entrance, through Ray's property, walk down this passage, enter my basement through the hidden door, and access that room, all without ever coming near my house, without ever being seen. I walked back up the steps and stood on the hillside, breathing the cold morning air, and I looked at the fence line between our property and Ray's. His house was visible through the bare winter trees. His car was in the driveway. He was home. I needed to be careful. I needed to think. I spent the rest of that morning doing something I should have done much earlier. I sat down with Lily's journal. I had carried it upstairs and hidden it in my desk drawer. Now I sat down and read it from the beginning. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect from a young woman's private journal. Notes about her work, her friendships, her feelings about her life and her future. Worries about money and her career. Thoughts about Derek, her boyfriend at the time, who she had apparently been considering breaking up with for several months before she disappeared. But in the last few entries, something shifted. About a month before she disappeared, Lily had started writing about something that was clearly troubling her deeply. She was oblique about it, the way people sometimes are in journals, as if even the private page feels too exposed. But the shape of it was there. She had found something out, about someone she knew, something that frightened her. She wrote, "I keep thinking I should just go to the police, but then I think about how it might affect Mom and Dad, and I don't know if I can do that to them. He's been part of their lives for so long. She wrote, he doesn't know I know. I have to keep it that way while I figure out what to do." And then, 4 days before she disappeared, "I'm going home this weekend. I think I need to tell Dad. I think he's the only one who will know what to do." She had come home that weekend. She had been there. She had helped us sort furniture on Saturday and Sunday. And then she had left on Monday morning. But she hadn't told me. Whatever she had been planning to tell me, she had lost her nerve, or found the moment wrong, or decided to wait. And then on the way back to the city, something had happened. Had she stopped? Had someone stopped her? I read the earlier entries again, more carefully this time, looking for any clue about what she had discovered and about whom. There were mentions of Ray in the journal. He had apparently been at our house several times over the years when Lily visited, and she had always described him warmly. Ray came over for dinner. He's so funny. Dad really likes him, that kind of thing. But then, 8 weeks before she disappeared, a different tone. She had been visiting us that summer, and she wrote, "Went into Ray's garage with him to look at his old woodworking tools. He showed me his workshop in the back. While he was getting something from a shelf, I looked at the workbench and saw some papers there. I didn't mean to read them, but I could see a name on one of them. I don't know what to think. She didn't write what name. She didn't write what the papers were. But in the next entry, 2 days later, I looked him up. He said he had never lived anywhere but here. But he lived somewhere else before, and something happened there. Something was covered up. That was all. She never named what she had found, never wrote the details. Either she was being deliberately vague in case someone read the journal, or she hadn't yet processed what she knew well enough to put it into words. I closed the journal and sat for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Detective Marsh. He had retired 6 months earlier, but I still had his personal number. He had given it to me a year into the investigation with an awkward sincerity that told me he felt guilty about how little progress they had made. He answered on the third ring, sounded surprised to hear from me, and listened quietly while I told him what I had found. The hidden room, the backpack, the writing on the wall, the passage through the hillside. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted several seconds. "Tom," he said. That was his voice, careful and measured. "I want you to stay in your house today. Don't go near Colton's property. Don't contact him. Call the non-emergency line and ask for Detective Reyes. She took over Lily's case when I retired. Tell her everything you just told me, and then wait. And if she doesn't take it seriously, she will," he said. "This is serious. A hidden room on your property with your daughter's belongings, with her handwriting on the wall. That's not a cold case anymore, Tom. That's a crime scene." I called Detective Reyes. She did take it seriously. She was at my house within an hour with a forensics team that arrived 30 minutes after her. I watched from the living room window while they processed the basement, the hidden room, the passage through the hillside. I watched Detective Reyes walk along the hillside and look at the cellar door and speak quietly into her radio. Sandra came home in the middle of it and stood in the front hallway with her coat still on, staring at the activity, and I had to explain to her what I had found. She sat down on the bottom step of the stairs and put her face in her hands, and I sat beside her and put my arm around her, and neither of us spoke for a long time. That evening, Detective Reyes sat across from us at the kitchen table and told us what they had found. Lily's belongings in the hidden room, fingerprints in the passage. They would need time to process them. And from a search of Ray Colton's property conducted under an emergency warrant, something significant. A secondary basement under his workshop, accessible through a trap door beneath his workbench. In that secondary basement, they had found evidence of long-term habitation. A cot, blankets, a chemical toilet, food storage, a ventilation shaft that ran up through the floor of the workshop above. Evidence, in other words, that someone had been kept there. For some period of time. Ray Colton was not at his house when the police arrived. His car was gone. His phone was going straight to voicemail. Detective Reyes chose her words carefully when she told us this, but I could see what she was not saying. I could see it in the flatness of her eyes and the way she kept her voice deliberately neutral. She was telling us that a man had been living next door to us for 11 years. That man had built a hidden system connecting his property to ours, that our daughter had discovered something about him, and that now our daughter was still missing, and so was he. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with Lily's journal in my lap and the flashlight on the desk, and I thought about all the evenings Ray had sat in our yard drinking beer with me, talking about his garden, complaining about property taxes, laughing at stories I told about Lily as a little girl. I thought about how much I had liked him, how much I had trusted him. I thought about Lily writing in her journal. He's been part of their lives for so long. She had been trying to protect us, She hadn't told me what she knew because she was afraid of what it would do to our lives, and that hesitation, that love, that consideration for our feelings, it had cost her. The guilt of that was something I knew would stay with me for the rest of my life. The search for Ray Colton went on for 11 days. During that time, the police found more. A storage unit in a town 40 miles away, rented under a false name, where they discovered documents and records that began to explain what Lily had found in his garage that summer. Ray Colton was not who he said he was. His real name was Raymond Bauer. 23 years earlier, in another state, he had been the primary suspect in the disappearance of a young woman. The case had never gone to trial. The evidence had been incomplete. Witnesses had recanted, and Raymond Bauer had quietly relocated and changed his name and built a new life as Ray Colton. The papers Lily had seen on his workbench. She had seen a name, probably his real name, and she had looked it up and found the old case and understood what she was looking at. The police found records in the storage unit that connected him to 2 other disappearances, one 7 years before Lily, one 4 years before Lily, both in different states, both unsolved. A pattern. A man who moved from place to place, rebuilt himself, waited, and then struck again. And then he had moved in next door to us, next door to a family with a daughter. I've thought about that many times since, whether he chose our house deliberately when he moved there, knowing we had a daughter. Whether he watched Lily grow into adulthood over the years, waiting. Whether the hidden room and the passage through the hillside were things he had built specifically with this plan in mind, or whether they were simply infrastructure he had constructed for when opportunity arose. I don't know the answer to that. I may never know. What I do know is that the room under his workshop showed signs that someone had been kept there for several weeks. Based on the writing on my basement wall, the date Lily had scratched there, November 3rd, and the conditions found in that room, the investigators believed she had been held captive from sometime around October 14th until late November. And then, at some point after that, she had been moved. Where was she now? That was the question that consumed me during those 11 days. She'd been alive in November. The writing on the wall was proof. She had tried to leave a message for me, which meant she had been in our basement, in that hidden room, not in his workshop, not in his underground space, but on our side of the passage. Had she found her way there herself? Had he moved her there? Had she gotten loose and made it that far but no further? I went back to the room late one night, after the forensics team had finished with it. I sat on the floor in the corner where she had written those words, and I put my hand on the wall beside them, and I thought about her in that room, in the dark, scratching those letters with whatever she had managed to find. I thought about her hope. I thought about her believing I would find it. It had taken me 14 months. I hadn't found it in time. Or had I? They found Ray Colton on the 11th day. He had driven north, toward the Canadian border, and had gotten as far as a small town in Vermont before his car broke down. He had been staying in a motel under a third name, paying in cash, watching the news. When the local police received the bolo and matched it to a man who had checked into a motel 4 days earlier, they moved quickly. He didn't resist. He was 67 years old, and he had been driving for 11 days, and he was, according to the officer who arrested him, remarkably calm. In the interrogation room, he said almost nothing for the first 2 days. His lawyer arrived and advised silence, and Ray, I still think of him as Ray even now, which is something I am not proud of, sat with his hands folded on the table and looked at the wall and gave nothing. On the 3rd day, something changed. I don't know what caused it. Maybe it was the evidence they showed him, the documents from the storage unit, the forensic findings from both properties. Maybe it was simply age. Maybe it was something else entirely. But on the 3rd day, he asked to speak without his lawyer, and he talked for 4 hours. Detective Reyes came to our house that evening. She sat at our kitchen table with Sandra and me, and she told us what he had said. Lily had found his papers that summer. She had researched his real name and found the old case. She'd been trying to decide what to do. On the Monday, she left our house, October 14th. She had made a decision. She was going to report what she knew to the police before she went back to the city. She had pulled over at a rest stop about 5 miles from our house to call the police non-emergency line. Ray had been following her. He had seen her pull over. He had pulled up beside her car, told her there was something wrong with her rear tire, and when she got out to look, he had used a sedative, something he had used before, the investigators discovered, and put her in his car. He had brought her back to his property through a route that avoided the main roads, and he had kept her in the room beneath his workshop. He had believed, as he apparently always believed, that eventually things would calm down, that searches would end, that the world would move on. But Lily was not someone who waited quietly. In early November, during a moment when his attention was elsewhere, she had found a way through the connecting passage into the hidden room in our basement. She had not been able to open the door into the main basement. The latch from her side was recessed, and she hadn't found it in the dark, but she had had enough light from a crack under the door to scratch her message on the wall. He had found her there and brought her back. That was the last time he had seen her, he said. He said she had become ill. He said he had panicked. He said he had not intended. And here his language became strange and careful, the language of a man constructing a version of events. He had not intended for things to go the way they did. He told them where to look. There is a state forest about 30 miles from our house, a trail that runs up into the hills and then west along a ridge before descending into a valley. About 2 miles in, on the eastern slope, there's a rocky outcropping with a flat face of granite. The trail passes about 50 yards below it. They found her on November 21st, of the year she disappeared, at roughly the place he described. I am not going to describe the details of what the investigators found or what the medical examiner determined. Some things belong only to the people who love someone and to no one else. What I will say is that she did not suffer at the end. That is what they told us, and I have chosen to believe it, because the alternative is something I cannot carry and remain standing. Sandra and I drove out to that forest on a cold March morning, 3 weeks after they found her. We stood at the edge of the trail and looked up at the granite outcropping, and Sandra held my hand so tightly that my fingers ached, and neither of us spoke. There was snow still on the ground in the shadow of the trees. The sky was white and flat and very still. I thought about Lily telling me about her apartment, the window box full of herbs, the life she was going to have. I thought about her on the kitchen counter with the cereal box, feet swinging, full of plans. I thought about her in the dark of that hidden room, scratching words into a wall because she still believed her father would find her. She had believed in me completely, even there, even then. That is the hardest thing. Not the anger, which is enormous, or the grief, which is larger than any word I have for it. The hardest thing is the faith she had in me, and the fact that I was living in the same house where she had left me a message, and I slept and ate and moved through my days for 14 months without ever going down to that part of the basement, without ever seeing what was right there. I know when I am thinking clearly that I could not have known, that there is no reasonable way I could have found it sooner. I know that, but knowing something and feeling it are different countries, and I have not yet found a bridge between them. The trial of Raymond Bauer lasted 3 weeks. He was charged in Lily's case and in the 2 other disappearances whose evidence was found in his storage unit. Witnesses came from 2 other states. Families I had not known existed sat in that courtroom and watched and waited the way I'd been waiting for 14 months. He was convicted on all counts. He is in a federal facility in the Northeast, and he will not leave it as a free man. I go to Lily's grave twice a month. We buried her in the cemetery near the church where she was baptized, under a stone that has her name and her dates and a line from a letter she wrote me when she was 10 years old, and I was away on a business trip. She had written, "When you get home, can we go to the beach, because I think the beach is where everything makes sense." We put those words on the stone. They seemed right. They seemed like her. Sandra and I sold the house. We couldn't stay there. We live in a smaller place now, closer to the city, with a flat yard and no hillside and no basement at all, just a crawl space under the floor that I inspected very carefully before we signed the papers. I tell this story because Lily deserves to be known. She was not just a missing person on a flyer, not just a cold case file, not just a victim. She was a woman who faced something terrifying with extraordinary courage. She looked for a way out. She found one, almost. She thought of me even when she was most afraid, and she left me a message because she believed in her father, and because she had a stubborn and radiant refusal to be forgotten. She was right about the beach, by the way. Last summer I drove out to the coast, a long drive, the same coast we used to go to when she was a child, and I sat on the sand at the edge of the water as the sun went down, and everything was not exactly clear, but it was something. It was movement. It was the beginning of the long, slow, necessary work of carrying this and still going forward. I do this for her. I go forward for her. Dad, I tried to come home. I know, sweetheart. I know you did.